Thank you all for being here with us for MoAD's monthly African Book Club. Today we'll be discussing the book, Are You Borg Now? By Said Shaiye. My name is McAllister and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the Museum of the African Diaspora. As we begin, I invite you all to share in the chat where you're joining us from. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples on whose lands we are located. MoAD occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, and we pay our respects to the Ohlone people and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. You can learn more about the native lands that you occupy by visiting nativeland.ca. MoAD is so lucky to have been partnering with Faith Adiele, our host and co-founder of the African Book Club, since fall 2019. So since 2020, we've been taking this program virtually and are very fortunate to have our authors join us frequently. So today is one of those days where author Said Shaiye will be joining us for the first 45 minutes of the discussion. So during that time, Faith will be moderating questions with him, and then we'll have the last portion of the book club to discuss amongst ourselves and reflect on any themes or topics that stood out to us during the process of reading this book. So during that time, we invite everyone to be an active contributor and participant, keep space for each other, and engage with each other's thoughts and comments. And one caveat of our book club is we do talk about the endings, though this is a different format of book that we generally read. For those who may not have finished the book yet, that's just a quick heads up. And with that, I think I'll pass it over to Faith to say a few words before our wonderful author joins us.
Hi, thank you, Mia. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks to everyone coming, taking time to zoom in for the Oscars. We appreciate you sharing your time with us. I understand that my background is pretty loud, so I thought by being on my headphones, that wouldn't be the case. There is background noise. I'm told.
For being here for our monthly.
Sorry.
Pardon?
No, that was my fault. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, I'm trying not to actually be on audio that much if it is distracting because of that. And actually, can we turn on, is live transcript on?
I can turn that on.
Okay, that might be good too. So yeah, I guess he'll be popping in any minute now. But it's exciting. I think this book just came out. It's very, experimental, as you can tell. I showed it to my art students in my class on teaching a class on characterization of memoir, and they were like super excited because I'm at an art school. So they were all like, "This is my favorite page. This is my favorite page." They were just like immediately understood. I felt kind of old, but so there was that. I was like, I get it, and yet it's an opportunity to kind of grow with the form. And I am always really interested in how form and structure can help kind of dramatize the content and create kind of new language for moving into new experiences and new territory. And so I think he's definitely of this generation of Africans, born and raised or raised very young in the US, and kind of trying to have these references that come from all over, this what we're calling the Afropolitan generation. So I have a kind of a mashup of American references and traditional African references and just, really different things together, and having, being partly Black American, but not. And so being a refugee, having all these different statuses, I think, lends itself to this this project. And here he is.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. So you could meet. You could be here to be with us. I'm Faith. I think you already know Nia and Elizabeth.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, you've had quite a relationship with MoAD this month. I understand you were at the open mic, and thank you for being willing to come back a second time to visit with African Book Club. And congratulations on the book and all your successes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me. And much love to MoAD and to Nia, and to you as well for helping me make all this happen.
Yeah, no, we're thrilled. That's great. Normally we get started with the author reading. Would you like to do that now, or would you prefer to do after we have a little conversation?
Let me just jump into the reading so I can get my vocal cords warmed up, and then we can do the conversation. All right, cool. Let me pull it up. I'm just gonna start from the very beginning of the book. Naomi Wildman. Explain. She was this little girl that was born on Voyager. Exactly how was never made clear, but she has anxiety about going back to Earth. In what way? Voyager, as you already know, has been wandering the Delta Quadrant for a couple of years now, trying to get back to the Alpha on the other side of the Milky Way. It's gonna take almost 70 years at maximum warp. And this little girl, Naomi Wildman, her entire world is inside of this ship. She's never seen Earth? Wouldn't know what to do with it if she did. In her spare time, she hangs out in the astrometrics lab with 7 of 9, asking her annoying questions. It's always fun to watch them interact. 7, this person who's rediscovering what it means to be human and talks like a robot in clipped, terse sentences. Recreation is irrelevant. Fun is inefficient. And Naomi, this curious little 7-year-old asking annoying questions. Deep sigh. What's wrong? I'm sick to my stomach again. What's on your mind? I'm not sure, but it's some type of anxiety. Also, I really don't feel like writing today. Then walk away. I won't be mad at you. I knew you'd understand. If not me, who else? Allah. Allah will always be there for us. Know that, but show that. Naomi Wildman. Explain. Why are 7 and her mannerisms so interesting to you? I don't know. Something about her speaks to me. The way she talks, maybe? Yeah, and also her emotional sterility. It's like she could feel emotions, but her emotional lexicon was limited. Think of her as an adult with a child's understanding of emotions. Sure sounds like someone I know. Yeah, I know. It's me. What did your last therapist say? That I have a limited emotional vocabulary. Said of 9. I like that. Catch me in my regeneration alcove, getting sleep. How did you sleep last night, bruh? Terrible. Heater was too high. I had on too many layers. Didn't drink enough water yesterday. Woke up dehydrated and icky, didn't you? Affirmative. And Wingstop. A 6-piece lemon pepper boneless combo with fries and a Barks root beer right before bed made my stomach do flips in my dreams. UNS stomach. I eat emotionally. You said that before. I feel like I'm getting bored of this format. It's not really going anywhere. We're kind of stuck. I think you're afraid of trying new things. Even when I'm trying new things, it's not swimming if you're using floaties. And I'm gonna stop right there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was great. That was great. It's so funny. So just before you came on, I was actually talking to the group about how this feels so very contemporary, that, you know, it reads like a mixtape and there are all these rich cultural references. We've got Voyager, we've got fast food, TV and film, American music. Clearly you're coming out of, you know, the oral tradition and spoken word. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this and also other influences we may be missing that are more traditional, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the main source for that mixtape feel is my leap association memory. You know, I'm autistic, and being autistic, memory is something that I struggle with. So my mind tends to use associative leaps to help me remember things and to make connections between those things. As a result, that's how I'm always thinking in leaps and bounds, especially when I write. I once worked on a Somali poetry translation project. It'd be a disservice to the depth of Somali poetic traditions for me to say that this book was influenced by them. but a lot of Somali poetry is alliteration based, where the poet uses one letter to tell a story throughout the poem, like A, B, 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 C, C, C. It's really strict and rigorous, but it needs a lot of creativity to make it work. And my mind wasn't built for following strict guidelines. My mind was kind of made to wander. So I think that wandering is where a lot of the form of this book comes from.
Wow, that was fascinating. Great to hear that. Thank you so much. That just like opens up so much for us. And so, yeah, I would love to talk more even about the form. I'm really interested in structure and how the content demands a certain structure, which it seems, you know, like you're inventing here. And it seems like a lot of hybridity, both in the way in terms that it's structured and then the things that you're interested in. You know, the piece you said where the voice says, you know, I'm bored of this format. And so there seems to be an agreement between the two speakers here, but there were also lots of other forms in the book. We've got these official, legal, and medical documents, which are kind of, I think, playing with the idea of what's an official account. We've got the Borg. There are a lot of kinds of forms that you know, you seem to be interested in. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what all of those things are doing.
Yeah, you know, a lot of that came up unintentionally. I was mostly just trying to use as many different tools in my belt, like the photos, the documents, the quotes, the lyrics, and all the memories associated with them that the reader can't see, that are only in my mind. I was using as many of those elements as I could to answer questions that I couldn't answer. And a lot of those questions honestly weren't meant to be answered, just kind of reckoned with or accepted. I don't really have an answer for why my family survived the Civil War, the refugee camps, the American poverty. I don't know why I survived all the hardships of my life since then, but I know Allah had our back and He wanted something greater for us. Islam is a big part of my life, and Islam tells us that Allah tests those whom He intends good for. Hardships are a way for us to get closer to Him, and I can say that me and my family's hardships have given us a strength and resolve that I don't take for granted. And I think that's one of the central elements of this book too.
I love that. You know, I feel that the Western memoir form has really strong connections to spiritual narrative, and that they both have these elements of the hero's journey, that, you know, there is this fall from grace, you leave home, there's kind of a shattering, you know, a shattering of what we know. And then, you know, we encounter all sorts of challenges, and then there's the long journey home. And, you know, I teach memoir, and that's the hero's journey is something that seems to really resonate across cultures, particularly for those of us who come from kind of, you know, marginalized or Southern Hemisphere cultures. So I'm really interested in how Islam and how you say Allah had your back kind of informs that structure. And kind of at one point in the book, it says, you ask the question, you know, can traumatic memories take a life of their own? There also seems to be some ambivalence about writing memoir and how the West, we kind of often require it to be around trauma. So I'm wondering how then this structure you have helps you go on a spiritual quest and explore those questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, you know, for one, faith is we all need something to believe in, and those things help us hold on and survive. And first and foremost, like, I want to say that I wrote this book to survive. I never expected it to become a book. It was just something I was doing to map out my own past traumas while escaping my present trauma. I kept it close to my vest, my chest, and only told my most trusted people about it. And this was something I needed to do to continue breathing. Like, after it finished saying what it needed to say, I submitted it for publication, and the pictures and documents, they came in like the second or third version. And the writing is largely untouched from when I first wrote it, except for some minor polishing and editing out of people's names to protect their anonymity. And then that format, that's kind of the background, that like the backbone for it, that came both by accident and by necessity. One, to try and avoid the trauma. I needed a way to do it. Like I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, I remember, in Minneapolis. It's a place that later burned down. It's called Adiele's Coffee. So before that, what led me to being at that coffee shop, I was struggling to breathe in an MFA program that's like chock full of racism and Islamophobia, like every single day of my life. And on top of that, I had an undiagnosed disability, autism. Well, two, if you also include the ADHD, which I also didn't know about at the time. And I was being asked to perform more than my body could handle. I was being asked to perform trauma constantly because that's what's expected of, you know what I mean? Oh, you're like, I want to talk about my family and they want to hear about how my family came to America. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. But it would be like 3 hours of workshop every week, teaching a 2-hour undergrad creative writing class, reading countless assigned books, plus my own writing that I had to keep up with, which was being encouraged to be more and more traumatic. Otherwise it would get really negative comments. So I was drowning, I was drowning alive. I didn't know which part of that experience like hurt me the most, but I knew I was hurting, and winter depression was also like right around the corner. This was in fall. So it was a really painful time for me in my life, and I couldn't trust my words with my classmates because their feedback always broke me down. No matter what I did, they never understood me. So I stopped trying to be understood. I stopped writing about my trauma in all the ways that they expected and encouraged me to. And I created a pocket for me to breathe into by saying no to every demand they made, the writing world made of me. And I just wrote for myself.
Wow, that was really powerful. It's really powerful. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Because I think there is a way. Yeah, there's definitely, we definitely know that we are asked to perform that trauma, and that's considered the narrative that matters. And so I love how we can use structure to kind of resist those expectations, retrain the reader, be in control of the narrative, of new ways of looking at these narratives. That's so important, and I really resonate with that, with my own experience writing my way out of depression that comes from systemic racism. Really powerful there. And I love that phrase, I created a pocket to breathe into. It's really amazing. And then of course there's the whole other thing when you decide to put it out there into the world, publish it, and then what comes back on you, which you also have to kind of be in control of to make sure that, because they're considered products, books are considered products, and then the author's considered a commodity as well. So it's really important to take care of yourself. So thank you for being so clear about that. I'm wondering also how genre helps with this kind of transforming the narrative. Just when you look at it, we can definitely see that it's a dialogue. It's kind of this meta conversation, but sometimes it looks like script, sometimes it looks like lyric, like poetry. There's definitely poetics in there. There's the oral tradition. There's what you do on the page, which normally in prose we don't pay attention to the page in the same way that we do in poetry, like how typography can help. I felt that the photos almost created like these little photo essays that were both political and spiritual. And it was an opportunity to engage with your experience on a different level. And it seems like those things were added maybe to kind of dramatize your world for the reader more. So could you just speak a little more about the genre decisions, or how one is supposed to read it? Because I think you can also control the speed at which the author or the reader reads something too, depending on how it's on the page.
Yeah, one thing I've heard is people read this book like really quickly, which was great to hear, but also very depressing because I was like, yo, it took me like 10 years to brew the ideas that are behind this. You guys read it in one sitting. I'm like, I don't got anything else for you. Like, you're gonna have to wait 10 more years. but like, I mean, other than that, like I've always been drawn to images, even as a child, and like actual photographs. And when it comes to writing, like I got to a point in my writing that like A to Z personal storytelling, it just kind of got played out for me. Like it felt tired because it was all I focused on for years. Like a few years of my life, I was like a memoir junkie. And I also remember like one winter where I wrote myself into a deep depression because I tried to write out my life story like from A to Z, but There was too much pain, like too much trauma, and it all broke me down. And I tried to tough guy my way through it, like just, just power through. But I can like still remember the bags under my eyes, the pain in my body from trying to do that. So that taught me that traditional memoir isn't something that I was meant to do, and that my specific body isn't capable of doing. So I also really dislike how limiting words can be. Even in poetry, people have so many rules about what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do. I love writing poetry, but I hate poetic forms. I hate rules. I hate boxes. I said it earlier, but my mind was made to wander. If I write a sentence and call it a line of poetry, people want to know why, because I said it is. That's why. But that's not good enough for people. But at the same time, that's like how arbitrary a lot of writing rules feel to me. But I also hate genre distinctions too. And as long as you don't call me a fiction writer, we'll have no problems. But to be honest, like words are my life, and images are too. Autistic minds tend to think in patterns. Our bodies depend on routines. We see things other people miss, but we're also easily overwhelmed by the world because our bodies are so attuned to noticing subtlety. The world is loud, scary. Sometimes I don't have words to describe it. I go nonverbal, and my camera comes into the picture. It captures everything I have to say, Putting together this book through various phases of the publication process, that really taught me a lot about how I see the world. It also showed me a window into my artistic process. My next project has even more pictures. I got pictures from the present, pictures on film, pictures from my family's photo album in like 1997. I just like taking pictures, Claudia Rankine is one of my biggest inspirations and favorite artists ever, right? And she once said in an interview that she's always trying to stuff everything she can into her poems. Mm-hmm. If I could, she said, I'd put music, like actual music, into my poems, but you can't do that on paper. So that's my approach to every artistic project I do: incorporate absolutely every part of my artistic process into it, because why not?
Exactly. Why not? Wow. That's amazing. So you brought up the fact that you wished we had spent a little more time reading it, or it was just a surprise that read it so quickly. Are there places where we should slow down to have more of an effect?
Wherever your body tells you to slow down. I've had friends who read this and broke down crying. My little sister told me that happened to her. I know it can be, I tried to avoid the pain and the trauma as much as I could, but I can't avoid the facts of my life. And as I said, I don't write fiction, so it's gonna come out one way or another. So I think what helped me finish this project was listening to my body. And that's one of the things that the second voice did, was tell me how my body was feeling in the moment as I was writing. So it taught me to listen, or to see different cues, the stomach tensing up, my like a pain in my shoulders, things that I always took for, just like I just happened to be feeling this for no reason, and didn't realize that there's a deep trauma connection between things that happened to me in my past and the trauma that's stored in my body. And then something similar triggering me now that I'm not even aware is related to the thing from the past. And now my body having a response, and I'm thinking, oh, I just have a headache for no reason. So learning to listen to your body. And if it feels like it's too painful or too hard, to just slow down and stop. I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm not going to be sitting there watching you read, so I won't know, and I won't take offense to it. I'll actually be happy that you took the chance to listen to your body.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful gift that you're giving to the readers. I think particularly in this culture, the opportunity to not silo into the intellect, but to actually listen to your body and listen to that knowledge. And that's part of the reading experience, the engagement, the recovery experience, all of that, I think, is really radical and really, really a gift that you're giving to the readers, in addition to sharing your own story, kind of providing an alternative way of dealing with things. That's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it makes me think about the tracking around the issues of kind of hunger and the stomach throughout the text, which something I also resonated with. I know in my own ethnic tradition, we talk with the Igbos of Nigeria, we talk about processing everything in your stomach. We don't say it's in your heart or in your head. It's like you have to chew the words and think about it. And so I was just really interested in all the kinds of literal and figurative hungers that you're talking about in the book. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Shit, I'm hungry right now. Hunger for knowledge, knowledge of self, of the universe, of my place in both. Hunger for a release of pain, hunger for salvation, for understanding. I mean, it's so much hunger. So much hunger in the world. People are hungry for something to believe in, despite the failings of this world. People are hungry to know themselves and each other. We're all hungry for a connection. I'm not sure what hunger I was referring to in the book, but I think I'm still hungry. I'll always be hungry. That's what growing up in a refugee camp and in the projects does to you. Even if the fridge is full, you don't know if it'll stay that way very long.
Right.
And with so many mouths to feed in our house, you learn to eat fast, right? And even if you don't want to. So today I still eat fast. I still fear hunger. My belly is out to here, but it's almost as if I'm trying to store fat for a rainy, hungry day. I don't know, man. It's also ephemeral. This life is so, you never quite feel full here. But this ain't exactly heaven. I mean, if it was, we wouldn't need to be here getting tested.
Wow. Everything you say is just so poetic. I'm like writing it all down. I'm just like, what? Like, oh my God. It's like
I appreciate that.
all day. That is
Words.
it's gorgeous. Well, then can we talk about how your poetry has informed the process of this book, or how this book has informed your future poetic endeavors? Have you really stepped away from spoken word, or you have a different relationship with it now?
I think, poetry has always been in my life. Like, both my grandfathers were poets back home. So it's always been in my blood, but I lost a connection with it in the transition from Africa to America, because we had to change languages. I had to learn to speak English at age 8. And to free up memory for that in my mind, I had to delete all the Somali, which I later relearned, like as an adult, with a thick accent, but that's ironic. But like, I think poetry's always been there. There's been times in my life where I try to give up poetry and walk away from it. Then I start writing essays, and then I look back on it and I'm like, yo, I've just been writing these very long, complex poems and calling them essays and fooling myself the whole time, But it's kind of the source for me, It's a friend of mine, Chris Martin. He's an autistic poet here in Minneapolis, and he said it one time. Autistic minds share one thing in common. They tend to operate in complex, imagery-rich patterns. They recognize patterns and systems naturally, like they just see the connections over and over and over, even without wanting to. And the same can be said of poetry. A lot of poetry involves complex, imagery-rich patterns repeating themselves, words and phrases and lines being placed a certain way to create this emotional meaning behind the words. And so once I realized I was autistic, I was like, one of the reasons why people think I talk so poetically is because my mind operates that way. That's like home base for me, which is great if you're an artist, but if you're in a professional business setting, not so great. So like, why don't you respond to my email in a way I can understand? I'm like, I just gave you this poem. What do you want from me? So yeah, I mean, poetry's always been there, and I feel like this book was a bridge between my nonfiction self and my poetic self, and the imagery self, and realizing there's not such a great distinction between any of those different, because they're all parts of me. They're like my inner children. They all have different personalities, right? And I think every artist, regardless of our discipline, only has to gain from exploring different modes of creating that art, you know, and they all inform each other, they all strengthen each other. How I look at a photograph now is different than how I looked at it 5 years ago. That's because I've looked at a shit ton of photographs, and I've also taken a lot more. But I've also written lines of poetry that were attempting to capture everything in an image. And then I realized I couldn't do that because, you know, that cliche, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Yeah, so I think it's all connected.
Yeah, yeah. That's so funny. It's reminding me, I started writing memoir because I was trying to do these crazy, crazy poems that had like so much history in them. And my friends actually had an intervention. They're like, you need to start using sentences and drinking less coffee. Because they were like, what are you trying to do? And so I can totally appreciate that.
Definitely.
That's great. Well, you mentioned Claudia, who's one of my absolute favorites and a huge inspiration to me too. Are there any other, I mean, I know there are tons of influences, and you actually talk about that in the book, but any other influences or ancestors you would like to just call out for, you know, inspiring, leading the way, particularly maybe the idea of coming up with the Borg elements, something like that?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, we got Larry Levis. Larry Levis is a big part of my life. He writes poems like nobody I've ever seen. They're like these story poems, you know, with wild spins and turns. This book right here, I don't know if it's backwards, Sir by Kenyatta A.C. Hinkle. This kind of size-wise, it's similar to how Borg is shaped and looks. And then if you look, I remember when I was first like starting the project, my mentor and professor, Doug Kearney, before I even got to the pictures, he knows I'm into photography. He started like, he gave this to me because this is like a copy that he had in his office. And he's showing me all the things that she was doing. Now she's trained as a visual artist.
Oh, wow.
And the prose she's writing in here is like somewhere in between, again, you know, fuck distinctions, but it's somewhere in between poetry and prose. And it tells a story. It's like a family memoir about her brother, their mom named him Sir. So a Black man in the South being named Sir, and white people have to call him Sir. Like they thought it was great. He didn't so much like that. Like he himself, they felt like that was a burden his whole life. But she writes the book in a way that's almost like a memorial to someone who's passed on, but he's very much alive. And it just uses so many different elements, including scans from newspaper documents in Louisville, where they're from, and looking at the local park in their city that used to be a plantation where her ancestors were enslaved, and just all the different sticky parts of that city, like how white people, when they hand you change, they never touch your hands, they drop it like that. And growing up in the North, I never experienced shit like that, but it was really deep and powerful, moving, and did so much, like with such complex, heavy material, and did so much to diffuse it. That helped me. Like I stole a lot from her style, to be honest with you. But no new ideas, right?
Right.
Yeah. Donald Quist is another one of my favorite writers. He writes nonfiction that feels like poetry. He writes about displacement. Kesey Lehman, heavy.
Yes.
In his earlier book, How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America.
Yeah.
There's so many people, so many poets, and just different artists. Gordon Parks. Word.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Doug Kearney himself's amazing. So that's so great that you have.
Oh, that's my guy. I feel like I left him out. That's man. He has been so critical that I would literally have dropped out of my MFA program if it was not for him. And he's helped me accept so much of myself, even when I didn't have any energy to put out work. We're supposed to be having these meetings, and I'm like, yo, I don't have that assignment. He's like, that's okay. I care more about how you're doing than I care about the work. And I'm like, oh shit. Like, no one's ever treated me that way in an academic setting.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I love to hear that. That's great. Thank you for giving us all those amazing titles. Really, really good stuff. Wonderful. So you said you'd be willing to maybe hear some audience questions?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good right now.
Excellent. Anybody have something? Elizabeth, I think you had mentioned something. Or folks can drop them in the chat as well.
I'm not sure what you're referring to, Faith, but I am, hi Said, I'm really excited to be here with you today. Yeah, I'm not sure what you were referring to, but I'm really interested in the structure of using the Voyager and the metaphor of being Borg. And I also saw like the images and the documents as like a more traditional linear narrative in some ways. And I thought that was super interesting because, you know, to have the images be the more traditional narrative rather than the words, I thought was an amazing way to write. So I guess I'm interested in hearing more about the Borg metaphor for you, and then also if that was your intention with the images or if I just pulled that out.
No, that's actually a great point. It just made me realize something. I'm somewhere between like a visual and a lyrical thinker, but it's definitely easier for me to process images than language as far as like engaging with it. But the process of going through the immigration documents, I had to do a Freedom of Information Act request on my own documents from the government. And when they gave it back to me, there was a lot in there, but there was also some shit that left out. They were like, parts of this are being used to surveil you by law enforcement, so we can't tell you about that. And I'm like, that's cool. But the parts that they did tell me, I had to go in there and do a deep dive, and there's so much like emotional heaviness attached to a lot of that stuff that it was a process that took almost 2 weeks to recover from. Like it was really painful. And then I just slapped it throughout the book wherever I felt like it felt right. But it was easier to tell that story that way with the images because there was less words, even though there's like documents with words in there. It was easier that way than to actually try and tell that story with words because it would be too damaging because they're my own words versus someone else's words and pictures. Anyway, the Voyager part, I mean, that was my home base, you know, for a long time. Like I'm mad as hell because it left all the streaming platforms and now it's on Paramount Plus, and I can't afford another damn streaming platform. And I already got the Hulu, the Netflix, you know what I mean? So Voyager was home. And when I was actually just reading the passage when we started, there was a line that stuck out to me about 7 of 9, like being returned to humanity and having to deal with emotions and being seen as a robot. And it also made me think about like how the world sees autistic people as robots, as emotionless, because our voices tend not to fluctuate when we talk. They kind of stay at the same tone, and our facial expressions are a lot more reserved. There's not a direct connection between what we're feeling and what we're showing on our face. So people don't know how to read that. They tend to dismiss us in many ways. But that doesn't negate the deep level of emotion that we feel within ourselves. But it's so hard to communicate with non-autistic people that they think we don't have those emotions or that we're not capable of describing them. But since finding out I'm autistic, I've made autistic friends. And let me tell you, we understand each other just fucking fine. Like, it is beautiful. Like, we are on the same page and there's so much less explaining to do. And it's really helped me reclaim my own humanity because I thought I was broken for a long time. And then I found out I was autistic and I was like, okay, that's a relief. But also, Now it means that I know why I'm going to have difficulties with people for the rest of my life. It's because most of them won't understand how my mind works, how I communicate. But knowing that there's a tribe of people that inherently know what I go through, and can communicate in the same ways that I do, that makes me feel like loved and seen. Yeah, and Voyager helped me clue into that before I had language for it. That's a really good question. Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question, but first I wanted to say, so because you were in the open mic this month, and I was so glad I could be there, that I read the entire book as a book of poetry. So I didn't. This discussion is really fascinating about genre. Like, to me, it is a book of poetry, and Claudia Rankine brings that to mind. That type of, those are books of poetry as well. But so I just wanted to let you know that I, as a reader, experienced it that way. I very much enjoyed the book, and even in a certain way, um, the text and the images, those little asterisks, I I even read it as sometimes overlapping poems, whether they
Mm,
were, sort of. There's something I call meta ekphrastic, where we can go from images to words and back, and um, anyway, it's a very deeply layered situation. But I just want to say that that is not my question. My question is about, and I don't know if it helps. I'm just curious about this MFA situation. I'm a poet. I wanted to go to an MFA program. I'm not able to, but like the more, so I created my own personal um, MFA program. That's what I've been doing. And uh, but the more I hear about programs, I hear about these dangers. And so I just kind of wondered, it's like, wow, maybe I should be happy that I'm just doing my own thing, because I'm going out seeking what I want and what I need. And that's what I'm doing. So Doug Kearney, I found on my own search for that. And it's like, cool, like in a weird, random way. But I wondered if you had any words of wisdom for students who go through MFA programs, who are students of color, then Black students in particular. And I also wondered, in terms of the Islamophobia, like I haven't heard too much about people saying students who practicing Islam in MFA programs, what's that like? Or I don't really know. I haven't heard too much about, like, I've heard about a lot of racism in MFA programs, but I'd love to have your take on how to deal with that. But I haven't heard too much about different religious communities within MFA programs, and I wondered what your thoughts about that, especially particularly with respect to Islam. Like, how much are people in Islam represented in MFA programs, or your particular program, or any, are there any connections or whatever? So those are my questions, just wondering about that, because that's going to be a mystery world for me. So, but I
yeah,
do talk to people who are thinking about it. So I love to hear about things like that. Thank you.
for sure, for sure. Shoot, where to start? My advice to anybody who's considering an MFA program, especially if they're a person of color, especially if they're Black, stay the hell away. It's not worth it at all. If I had a time machine, I would go back in time and I would not do this again. Um, I've been through some terrible, terrible pains in my life, and nothing even remotely comes close to the shit that I've suffered in an MFA program. Um, Being autistic made it worse, but look, I mean, I'm in what's supposed to be allegedly one of the best MFA programs in the country, whatever the fuck best means. I'm going to be the first Black person to graduate in 4 years. In my 3 years here, two other Black students have dropped out, traumatized for life. I've been this close to dropping out the whole time I've been here. So I don't consider myself like a survivor, or I don't pat myself on the back for that, because this has left me damaged in ways that I don't know if I'm ever going to recover from. And my writing has not gotten better before it. I was writing better in many ways before I got here, because I believed in myself more. I believed in my own words more. But all that aside, if somebody would have to take it, like the advice that I would give them is is know your price before you walk in the door. And if that line is being crossed, don't be afraid to walk away. Have a community outside of the program, because that will hold you down. Have people that you can talk to about anything and everything, because there's things you can't talk to about the people in your program. And also have readers that you trust outside of the program, so you can get different insights, because the way programs are structured, no matter where they are, it's this competitive cesspool of insecure people that are trying to one up each other and tear each other down. It is not a healthy place for anyone, you know, and it's not a place that you can create your best work from. It tends to make people write in a way that's extremely similar to each other. It tends to drown out unique voices, and it creates this groupthink mentality. It's just not healthy in any way, shape, or form, you know. Yeah, as far as what you said about creating your own MFA, like honestly, that's a secret. That is absolutely the secret. Find a community of writers that you connect with and you grow with, and who challenge you in good ways, who never make you feel less than, and stick to them. And find the artists out there in the universe that motivate you. Read their work, engage with their work, reach out to them if you can. People are really generous and humble, even if they've made it for the most part. Like to be a writer requires you to be someone of heart. You know, you have to pay attention to this world. And so most of the time, these people are not going to have egos. Sometimes they do. So they're going to be really approachable, you know. Yeah. And then as far as the part about, you know, the Islamophobia, that's a deep, deep question. I'm just going to sum it up by saying it is hard to be Muslim in Western academia, because a lot of the tenets and beliefs that Western academia holds true go against your faith. And it would be fine if they go against your faith and they let you do your own thing. But for the most part, you feel like a villain when you're sitting in class, no matter what you say or do, just because you happen to be Muslim and because they know your beliefs, regardless of how you engage with people, how hospitable and caring and understanding you are with other people. You don't get that same love in return. And so there's some very murky waters that you exist in, and there's elephants in the room that everyone sees but no one speaks about, you know. Yeah, it's not been fun. It has not been a good time, but I have managed to cultivate, you know, my own group of like-minded writers outside of the program, and that's what's really helped me, you know, come back to a place of enjoying my writing and actually loving writing again. You know, the Patrice Lumumba Writers Group out in the Bay Area, you know, we meet every Tuesday night, and it's people of color, but mostly Black, and we just pull up and we do a little sharing time, talk about what we've been struggling with, and then we write for 20 minutes, and then we share our writing. And we hype each other up. We go to each other's events. We reach out to each other. You know, if I was there, I'd be hanging out with them, but I live in the middle of fucking nowhere, so I'm not. but like that kind of a community has been more helpful to me than anything I've experienced in the program. And I actually just reached out to somebody who left the program last year, who graduated, and they were telling me how they miss parts of the program because it forced them to create a lot of writing, and it was like super fast paced, but it also wasn't necessarily writing that they wanted to be doing, and they knew that it would be getting critiqued and broken down and, you know, torn apart by people in often very petty and harmful ways. And so she was like, I don't miss that aspect of it, and I actually like that I only write when my body wants to write now. So it creates this unnatural production, like almost capitalistic approach to writing, and that really goes against the real way people should be writing, is when they feel like their body has something to say. And if that happens to be every day, great. But if it's not, forcing yourself is not going to make anything lasting come out. You know, your body knows, your subconscious knows. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was just huge. Thank you.
I have one
You.
quick question before I know we're reaching your time. It was such a treat to hear your poetry last week at open mic, and you spoke just now about the importance of community writing. So can you share what is currently exciting you about the writing, the new writing that you're doing now?
I'd say just the freedom of possibility, you know. I've been doing independent studies for a while at the program, just because I had too many run-ins with people and like traumatized by students, by professors, and it was just like, yo, I'm either gonna leave this place or you guys can help me find something that will fulfill the requirements and let me study in an independent way, and that I don't have to engage in workshop with people who just don't like me. So once I got to that place, I was able to allow myself to really, because I couldn't trust myself to write anymore, because I knew whatever I had to say, even if I hid it, it was going to get torn apart. So slowly thawing out and getting back to a place of just writing, just to write, really allowed me to open back up again. And I went down to Kenya this last summer, Nairobi, and I was, I went for a hike in the woods, giraffes, stepping over giraffe poop. It was amazing. And I was able to get like a lot of source materials. Went to the Kenya National Archives, studied the understanding of Somali people from a colonial aspect all the way back to the 1800s. Seeing how we've been villainized and othered even within East Africa, by our own people a lot of the time. And then just seeing how those themes have always been there and how the alienation I felt my whole life from coming from Africa to America, that wasn't necessarily anything new, and how we've kind of always been outsiders in a lot of ways. That made me feel both depressed and also like relieved. But I was also able to get a bunch of family, I alluded to earlier, family photo pictures from my little brother. And those pictures have created a bunch of writing, and they're all in my new project. Just finding new ways to approach art making and seeing myself more of a multidisciplinary artist than a writer, even though writing is like that's home base, but learning to trust more the other aspects of my art, in the ways that I trust writing. Yeah, that has been, I think, the most exciting part.
Thank you for that. And I'm very excited to see what's going to be next for you, and hear more of your work. And so I want to be respectful of your time, and thank you on behalf of all of us for joining us for this conversation. I feel like I have such a deeper appreciation for your work and this book specifically, getting to hear you share. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you everybody for your time. And also thank you for reading the book, man. That means a lot to me. Like this is this is one of the things that I'm most proud of having produced in my life. And it feels like a dream come true. So for me to just be sitting here today talking about my work is a really humbling and honoring experience. And I thank you so much for engaging so deeply with the work and having these beautiful questions for me.
Thank you. Well, more to come, hopefully.
Yeah, inshallah. All right, thank you guys.
Take care.